Hi guys, today we are going to discuss the topic of comic generation. First of all, what approaches we do have right now and what approaches does exist and which of them are the most prominent and interesting in terms of research. Uh, let's start with some review of one person. This is first approach we will discuss today, and here the author used 3 steps in order to generate the comic. First of all, he applied the GPT-3 model in order to um, write the prompt of description of all comic. So here the author write characters and a wide description, detailed description of these characters. Then he added some settings and dialogues. The next step the author applied is to use DALL-E in order to draw the images. Here he wrote that long prompt into the DALL-E model, and he got these samples. Here we can see that is a real comic set, but it has many problems as well, which can be here, there. And the last step he applied is to apply the Photoshop in order to clean up the artifacts he got from the DALL-E. For example, some unnecessary details and some problems with eyes and the face, and of course putting word clouds, because generative models has its own language. Nobody knows what does it mean, but it means only the one thing, that the author needs to fix it in order to make valuable, understandable, distinguishable comics. And this approach is requires to create a story, to describe a story, and the GPT-3 usage was made just to enlarge the story description. But the story ideation was done by the person. And the second step is to apply some handle cleanup in order to refactor all the artifacts and problems the person got from generative models. Here also there are another approach similar to this one, is to create a story, split it sentence by sentence or scene by scene, and generate via DALL-E or Midjourney image by image and place it into canvas manually in order to make a story. Let me show the cool example of it. This is example of comic book, complete book, generated by Midjourney itself. And here authors created the story. They wrote by their own the words and story description. They generated these images, place it there, and place these word clouds there as well, manually. And they got this beautiful story, this beautiful comic. I really like this style of this story because it's so interesting. So yeah, they generated a lot of images, and then they have to place it manually. Here, by the way, we can definitely see that that was generated by some image generative model, because there is something wrong with their faces, and that is known problem of Midjourney on DALL-E, because it tends to have some problem with image generation of faces. And just let me show some colored samples. yeah, again with the face we have something strange. Yeah, that is images. Oh, I mean colorful images. So this approach, it's it saves some time because the person, the author, don't need to draw it by himself, but himself. But it's still not completely automatic approach, and it involves creation of the story, writing the prompts, splitting it in order to place it in generative models and generate the images, and then making a canvas, placing all the images and prompts together in order to create a flow of story. Uh, the next approach is more automatic for now. It's the idea to apply completely whole automatic generation of comic. So here authors try to apply it for generative adversarial network in order to create comic, and honestly the result was not that satisfactory. Let me show some generated samples. You can see that Gun was able to learn some features of some characters, but it wasn't able to give high fidelity of images, and also there is no expression, there is no dialogue, there is no story. It's just a set of images. Um, so it means only that direction, that approach, I believe it's interesting and it might be researched further, but it has some questions the author need to face before developing it. For example, I think that one of the hardest part will be dataset collection, and here we can see that the Gun was trained only on one style comic, but there are so many styles of comics, and more styles mean more data, and I think that involves more complexity to that approach. But still, this approach does not require any sample by sample generation in DALL-E or Midjourney. It complete automatic approach when the person ideal then the person when the person don't need to create a canvas because it's already created by the Gun. But here is the greatest challenge, is to make that story understandable and complete, because this set of generated images does not mean that they are connected by some story. So that is the greatest challenge for this approach. And it might be developed further, I believe, because the idea is interesting. And the last story, the last approach we will discuss in terms of comic generation, that approach starts from the story ideation. So the idea is to create a story via code done by some programming language, mapping it into physical objects and then mapping it into comic. Here is the simplest example. You can see, like, we have some code sample with some variables and some relations, which has a reflection or mapping in physical objects, like X is apple, true, that it means that tastes good, and then again row by row it generated, it mapped or converted into visual representation with comic. This paper is not technical because it's more about the description of the product code tune these guys created, and it doesn't apply any generative approach, but the story behind this is more interesting. um, let me show let me prove that it does not has any generative aspect. Like, this is interface of user. Here we can see code field, story field, and comic field. In a code field we have a some part of code the person might write down, and or he might use some example. Then this code is mapped into the story by using the replacing these variables, relations, and other constants into some physical objects, and then it can be generated into visual representation by these two buttons. These buttons means to add on the left, and this button means to add on the down. And also the person needs to find or create the physical visual representation of these words like banana. Of course, it has some pre-installed mapping of written name and visual representation, but still it does not any generation approach to create it manually, create it automatically. So this paper is more about, is done for pedagogical aims, because they conduct a survey where they ask teachers and students to evaluate the product, and all of them told that this approach might help students and other people to understand the abstraction of coding, because it was stated that abstraction level might be difficult for some people to understand, and this might give the greatest examples of code lines which student can understand. So it's easy to understand some story than abstraction level. And here we could use it for comic generation by adding some generative model like GPT-3 or DALL-E. Here is better to add some DALL-E, because we have some abstraction story. We don't need to create the story itself. We need just to create a canvas, a structure, and this approach can fill it with physical object automatically. So we don't need to create the story itself full of details. We just need to write abstraction level of all of the story. And also I liked how they described the experimental design they applied in order to understand the applicability of their product. Is it helpful for people or it's not? And as data scientists, we see a lot of papers where we have many technical details, like the amount of layers, the architecture, the particular batch size, and so on, but we don't often see some experimental design and description of design. So it was interesting just to observe how they conduct that experiment in order to make this more true experiment than pseudo experiment. And making some conclusion about all the story, let me go to some image. Yeah, there are four the most obvious ways that can be found in topic of comic generation. The first of them is the most manual approach, when we need to create a story, split it by scenes and generate image of every scene and place these images with word clouds on the canvas in order to make a flow story. So here we use only DALL-E or something like that in order to optimize the process, but we still need to create a story. We still need to do the work of placing it all together. So of course it saves some time, but not that much as we might think about. The second approach is trying to generate the comic itself, trying to generate this canvas, not placing image by image together, but generate images together in a board. This approach still needs to create a story, a full detailed story, because such models as DALL-E do understand only detailed story. It needs a lot of details to generate what the person needs to have. And of course, it requires some story again. Another approach is to try to generate it automatically via GAN, for example, when we can generate the story itself from the start to the end without creating strict, detailed description of all the dialogues, replics, expressions, and that saves more time and more effort. But this approach requires a lot of challenges that need to be faced before creation of that approach. And the last approach is more about is facing that aspect of story ideation when we can apply abstract level creation in order to create the story. Here, that approach also requires a lot of research, but I think that these ideas might develop significantly the area of of comic generation, and so give more understanding on what to do in order to develop this area. So that is the review of current state of comic generation area. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, you're highly welcome to ask. And of course, see you next meeting. Thank you.